Our speaker today is a member, a real asset to this organization. He was a navigator, flying at a B-17 out of England. We have more navigators in this organization. They can't seem to find their way out. And we're waiting.
They live longer.
They live longer. They can hardly find their way home. He's steeped in, he just said something. Now look in that direction. He's steeped in military history. Recently has been reading events that led up to Pearl Harbor. And some of the things that we don't know until he tells us. And he's going to tell us right now. Please join me in giving Jim Rasmussen a rousing hand. Get up.
Thank you. I was stationed over in England during the war, and I wasn't paying much attention to what was going on over in the Pacific at the time. And some of this stuff, as the years go by, you kind of forget about them and things like that. But Jack Christopher sent me some information on what was happening in the Pacific when he was over there. So, and I was reading this stuff, and I thought it was really fascinating to read about what had been planned for the invasion of Japan, and what they had figured would be the outcome of the invasion of Japan. And there was starting way back in 43, they were already planning, what the invasion in Japan would be, and so they gave it a name called Operation Downfall. And I don't know if you're familiar with Japan, but Japan is basically 3 large islands. The southern island of Ryukyu, and then there's the big island is Honshu, and the northern island is Hokkaido. And they were planning on, after they had occupied Okinawa, they were planning on first going into the southern island and 3 different beaches on the southern island. Well, Japan's geography is such that there's only a few places in Japan that have beaches that are suitable for invasion. And this was obvious to the Japanese just as much as it was to the Americans. So when the Americans were planning their invasion in 3 places, southern beaches in the southern island, the Japanese had estimated that would be where the invasion would be coming to. So they, when we were planning what type of a situation we'd have to make the invasion, the Japanese were putting up their defenses in the same place. Then they had the second place they were planning invasion was up in the Tokyo Bay area. And the Japanese figured that would be the other place that we'd be invading too. So,
what were the dates they were planning?
The dates on, they were planning to occupy the southern island in November 1st of 1945. They had a little problem over there in the Pacific, and over in Europe, of course, we had a single commander, but over in the Pacific, you had MacArthur handling the southern part, and Nimitz was in charge of the Pacific area, the northern area. So when they decided they were going to have a single command for the Japanese deal, well, they got into a lot of arguments and then almost sidetracked the detailed planning. But MacArthur was eventually selected for be the leader, and they even considered him for a super rank, so that he'd outrank all the other five-star generals. One of the things that they didn't consider at the time was using an atomic bomb, because they didn't have the information on that at that time. That was too much of a secret. Most of these people didn't even know about it. Anyway, like I said, prior to in 1943, they were already considering the invasion. there was very few beaches, and so that was, the Japanese were setting up the defense at the same time as we were. So the first invasion in the southern island, Kyushu, and that was dated for November the 1st, 1945. But prior to the actual invasion, they were going to occupy some of the smaller islands just off the coast there, so that they have some places where they could put things like jackets, flying seaplanes, and the smaller islands off the coast. And so now the invasion of the southern island was not to conquer the entire island, but it was intended for just to get the southern half where they could set up staging areas and set up air bases and whatnot that would be involved in the invasion up by in the Tokyo Bay area, Honshu. The southern invasion, they had named that Operation Olympic, and they had the Cornet was the invasion of the Honshu Island up in the Tokyo Bay area. During this, they had, of course, our people were trying to estimate what type of a defense the Japanese could put up. They figured that since we were flying B-29s over in Japan and receiving very little opposition from their Air Force, they figured the Japanese didn't have much of an Air Force left. But and then of course they were, when they immediately started checking how much land forces the Japanese had in the southern islands, they could only come up with like 2 divisions in the southern island. But by the time they got ready to invade over there, the Japanese had brought troops in from Korea and over from Asia and from northern Japan, and so they had a total of about 900,000 troops in the southern island by the time we got there. The Japanese were taking all their aircraft. They had even training aircraft and whatnot, and were converting them to kamikaze planes. They figured that the Allies figured that the Japanese only had about 2,500 aircraft available, but the Japanese had gotten together. They had put more than 10,000 aircraft together for the invasion. Their idea was that when our invasion fleet would be coming in and whatnot, they had going to have something like 2,000 fighter planes that would maintain the control over Kyushu. They had 300 attack fighters that were going to attack the military, the aircraft carriers, and the battleship, and they were going to have 825 kamikazes in the very first wave. The Japanese, then, when they in Okinawa, had sent in about 1,000 kamikazes, and they had a kill rate then of one hit and 9 attacks. So out of 9 planes, only one would actually hit the ship they were at. Now, the Japanese only get a 1 in 6 hit when they flew their planes in, because in Okinawa they had a long distance to fly over land and whatnot, over the ocean. When they take off in their home base, they only had a short distance to fly before they could attack our people. The Japanese estimated that their kamikaze planes would sink more than 400 ships. And they were being trained then to target the transports and skip the carriers and destroyers and whatnot. The idea was that Japanese estimated the kamikazes would destroy 1/3 to 1/2 of the invasion fleet before the landing even happened. they had, of their 10,000 kamikaze planes, they hoped that they would be able to sustain 200 to 300 day attacks for at least 10 days against our equipment. And most of all the other islands that we had conquered with the Japanese and whatnot, we normally had our strength of troops was greater than what the Japanese had. In many cases, it was 2 to 3 to 1. By the time it got to time to invade Kyushu, the Japanese, like I said, had 900,000 troops there. And this gave the Japanese odds of they were 3 to 2. And there was some consideration then when they discovered that the odds would be that great, that they were even talking about moving to another place, changing the idea. The Navy had proposed in the first place to just continue the bombing and whatnot, and more or less encircle Japan. But the Army insisted that they had to have a ground attack. When MacArthur had heard about the fact that the Japanese had so many people, he dismissed the need for changing plans. He said, I'm certain the Japanese air potential as reported is greatly exaggerated. And as for movement of ground troops, he didn't figure that as good information. In my opinion, there's not the slightest thought of changing the Olympic operation. Now that, I don't remember if you recall, during Korea, remember MacArthur was quoted as saying that he didn't consider the entrance of the Chinese in the Korean conflict with much consideration. So, and unbeknownst to the Americans at this time, when we were planning to invade Japan on the 1st of November, and then that operation was to last 3 months. And during that time, there were the troops that were going to go into the Tokyo plains. They were accumulating those troops, and then so after 3 months, then there would be on the 1st of April, they were going to 1946. When I mention some of these days, I think about Clemens there with training in a B-29 over there, so he definitely would have been one of these people that had been over there in Japan. I know at the time when the war was over in Europe and whatnot, there was kind of speculation that we'd be flying our B-17s over to the Pacific area. And of course, they held it over there for about until after the Japanese surrendered before they sent us back home. Some of the guys had gone back before, but our group was mostly still intact by the time the Japanese surrendered in August. So, but anyway, unbeknownst to the Americans, the Soviets were planning on occupying the northern island, Hokkaido. And if we hadn't dropped the bombs on the 15th, why, it's very likely that today Japan would be split, just like North Korea is split. The northern half of Japan would have been a different government. Operation, and then the Japanese had signed up 28 million Japanese in what they call the civilian fighting force. They were been armed. Japan didn't have any really arms for them, but they were armed with anything that was available. Some of them might have muzzle-loading shotguns. They had spears. They had even issued a high school girl. They had issued her an awl. That's one of those things, just punch holes in leather. They said, at least you can kill one with an awl. and they told her to make sure she stabbed them in the abdomen. So, anyway, so the amount of, since so many of the civilians would have been involved in the defense of Japan, they figured that they probably would have been close to 2 to 3 million civilians killed in such an operation. And of course, in Okinawa, you remember you've seen pictures of where the civilians are jumping off the cliffs in Okinawa, so they would, and they figured that a lot of the Japanese would actually end up committing suicide the same way. They had a national slogan at the time, 100 million will die for the emperor and the nation. So all the civilians were pretty much be involved in the. So had the bomb not been dropped, the aviation not been launched by, the combat casualties would have really been in the millions. They estimated that the Americans would have had 1,200,000 casualties, with over 250,000 actual fatalities. That was just on the first operation that was to be taking place. The second operation would have taken place, would have added additional to that. So, clear to indicate that the Battle of Japan would have resulted in one of the bloodiest biggest bloodbath in the history of warfare. And the worst would have been what would have happened in Japan as a nation. Like I said, it probably would have been split between the North and South like Japan is also. So actually, one of the things that all the transport ships and whatnot that were going to carry all these invasion troops into Japan, they instead were carrying the American troops back home. So if somebody wants to really get a lot more information out, there's a couple. I come across a couple of books, but I didn't get the books myself, but I got a lot of references from the books. There's a book actually called Downfall, written by Richard Frank. And there's another book, The Invasion of Japan, which is written by Wayne Skate. There's some, I'm surprised at the information, the amount of information that is available on this. That is kind of one of the things that we kind of forget about. We consider, we had ours was the good war, and you forget about what the casualties would have been if the bombs hadn't been dropped. And how many of us now would have been involved in that? I'm sure that even us that were over in England, they had intended to move the 8th Air Force. In fact, some of the original 8th Air Force officers were already over in the Pacific area when the war ended. So the 8th Air Force, some of it was going to be shipped over there. Most of all the people that were going to be involved in the invasion of Japan were all American troops. The only time that like Commonwealth troops, the British and the Australians were going to be involved with a follow-up up in the Tokyo Bay area. They're Navy ships, so they were going to contribute, I think, 14 aircraft carriers plus several cruisers and destroyers to the Navy fleet. But our Navy, I understand, had something like 44 aircraft available, or aircraft carriers available at that time. They were going to convert most of the dive bombers and torpedo bombers. They were going to take them off and put fighter planes on the aircraft carriers because they figured that fighter planes were what they needed to shoot down the kamikazes and things like that. See? So, okay.
Any questions? No.
Just a short sidebar note. My older brother, he was in the second day of the Normandy invasion. Fought all the way across France and Germany. He was in Frankfurt when the war ended. And his whole unit, they were sent to rudimentary Japanese training, language training. they were trained in Europe for the planned invasion. And he was on a troop ship going across the Atlantic when the bombs were dropped.
Okay, yeah.
And he and his whole unit, they had enough points because of their combat experience. As soon as they hit Camp Gilmer, they were discharged. So it ties in exactly what you're saying.
And the number of troops that were scheduled, there was 14 divisions that were in the initial invasion of Europe. And they were going to figure they needed 24 divisions for the invasion of southern Japan. And they, of course, up in the Tokyo area, they had scheduled 44 divisions for the invasion up there. So the size of the invasions were just enormous compared to what we had put into Europe also.
He said they were taught just enough, a few Japanese expressions that they were going to use in the planned invasion.
Hey.
I just expanded what you said. Dwight Olson, as you know, was in the 15th Air Force out of Italy. And he had completed, I think, 32 bombing runs over Germany. And when the war was coming to an end, they sent him over to Japan. He was part of the occupying force there. But he didn't have to go in for bombing that because of the surrender.
He apparently didn't have enough points to get out of that.
Right, not enough points to get out. And he was there for working and training and using, Japanese and developing the occupancy.
Yeah.
Jim, let me tag along on what was just said. My brother-in-law was also part of the group that entered the war right after it began with Germany, fought all the way through Europe, and was then assigned to the Far East. He was on the west coast of the United States waiting for shipment to the Far East when the war ended. And during my tenure, I'm just a youngster, I had the pleasure, if you want to call it that, of knowing a Japanese colonel who had been educated at one of our finer universities on the East Coast. So their planning people were well educated in warfare. And he was wise enough that in one of the Japanese invasions of one of the islands, instead of being killed, he got down and moved back. And that's a real no-no with the Japanese. As far as the planning for that war, as you said, Jim, every man, woman, and child in that island was being trained to kill with the means that they had available to them. It would have been a real bloodbath. And the thing that was rather unique and kind of funny, we would have gotten a kick out of it, a fellow by the name of Azitomi worked with our unit during the Korean War. And he knew every slang word in the American vocabulary, probably a few we didn't have. And the unique thing about that man was, during Doolittle's raid on Tokyo, his home was burned down at that point in time. So there's all kinds of history you want to take. It's really interesting to do so.
I could just add one more thing. I spent 7 years in Japan, and knowing the Japanese, if it had been the atomic bomb, they never would have given up. Your grandmother and grandfather, they would have fought right to the death. That's the tenacity of the Japanese and the way they were instilled, that they were fighting for their own cause, and almost like the Islamics going to paradise and to die for the emperor.
I know one of the interesting things is in doing the reading and whatnot, they were speculating that they were going to utilize civilians to help rebuild the forts and whatnot. And I thought it just didn't jive in a sense to when you read about the fact that they were all supposed to be either killing us or killing themselves, that we were going to get civilians to help us rebuild the forts and whatnot.
But they paid well when I was flying for them.
Oh, well. Well, actually, I spent a couple of years in Japan, and of course, the situation was totally different back then. That was 5 years after the war.
Jim, my engineer and my crew at a reunion told me that when we landed, came back from Italy, that we were assigned to the white plant to go into B-29.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever heard that term, white plant?
No, I didn't come across that. Yeah, when I think about it, when they talk about sending the B-17s overseas, but I thought, I don't know where they would have operated from because they didn't have the range that they could really use them over there. Although from Okinawa, they'd be all right to get to the southern islands. And then they were hoping that once the southern island, within 3 months, the southern islands were, or the last part of the southern island was to be to develop enough air bases there that would support the Tokyo troops.
Very interesting.
Jim, thanks very much. Any more questions for Jim? See you next year.